All right. Welcome everyone to the 10x ad targeting formula. My name is Chris. I'm just your lowly host today. But the real stars are Fabien David and Alvin Ding. I'll do some quick intros and then we'll dive right into it. So first up, we got Alvin Ding. He's spent the last decade turning ad budgets into gold. He's managed over $200 million in spend, scaled growth for brands like Airbnb and Upwork, and builds GPTs in his spare time just to solve life's little annoyances. Basically, if Mad Men had a Silicon Valley reboot, he'd be the lead. Next up, we have Fabien David, a man who's forgotten more about growth marketing than most of us will ever learn. He's led acquisition at Notion and Airbnb, advises half of San Francisco, and still finds time to bike 545 miles for charity. Basically, a bad targeting where a video game, Fabien already beat the final boss. So great to have you guys. Any words of wisdom to kick us off before we dive in?
Wow. Thanks for that amazing intro. Nothing from my end.
Yeah, likewise. Probably the best intro I've ever had.
Yeah.
All right.
Admin.
I'll take that. Cool. So we got a packed agenda for today. We're going to start with learning how to build better personas. We'll get a little bit into lead enrichment and lead scoring for better ad data. We'll move into platform-specific targeting strategies. We'll end it with some talking about like some tools for analyzing ad performance. And then we'll go through some real life case studies for that platform specific targeting strategy aspect. But before we go into the building better personas section, we wanted to start with a formula here as per the title of the talk. So effectively, this combines all of the different sections that we're about to go through and how they combine to lead to better performing ads. So we'll talk about the building clear personas side. We'll talk about layering in that lead enrichment and lead scoring, and then that platform specific targeting, which leads to those better performing ads and more ROAS for your money. So to start, going to go into building better personas and audiences and hand the mic over to Alvin to kind of talk us through his 1 hour persona method.
Awesome. Yeah, and the good thing is this used to be an hour, but with AI and all that, it's much faster now. So anyone watching this, don't get scared off by the time commitment. This is the single most important thing, in my opinion, that anyone who's starting any kind of marketing needs to absolutely tackle. And the reason why I say that is because, they say that the most important skill in sales, it's not the gab, it's not how well you can talk, it's actually listening. And I wholeheartedly agree. The reason why is because to convince anyone of anything, you need to know what their buttons are, right? You need to know what they want, what their emotions surrounding what they want are, what their other options in the marketplace are. And you need to smartly position your pitch in a way that is attractive to them. And the same thing applies in marketing. You have to know exactly all those things. It's basically the same kind of convincing, but just through a different type of medium. Rather than one-on-one like talking hand-to-hand combat, it's more like passive. It's ads, it's digital experiences, things like that. And when you're paying, $20 CPM on Facebook, every impression, the more that impression can do to drive interest, the better your ROAS and ROI is going to be. So building this persona is always step one. And the way I build it is I have this table on the next slide here, where I have 4 panels. On the left, it's who they are. Moving one panel to the right, what they want, another to the right, how they currently get what they want, and then the last one on the right is what their barriers may be. And it really, in my view, drills down from like top level down to granular micro level, where the top level is like, demographic stuff. What gender are they typically? What is the composition of this audience, this marketplace? What their age ranges are, and what kinds of like titles they give themselves, what they think they call themselves. And then what they want is, and in this example, this is a persona panel that I put together for an old client of ours, actually referred by Fab, Amit from Pseudorite.
You're welcome.
Yeah, I worked with them for 3 years. Thank you. But yeah, so in the second column here, we dive into what they want, right? So actually backing up, who they are, these people are people who write scripts, write novels, write stories. And at the time, AI writing tools, this was 3 years ago, super novel. I think this is like beginning of 2021 or 2022. And it was a total paradigm shift, game changer. And so this product from day one, we were able to scale with profit and with ROAS and strong performance. And a large part of it was, this, which, and I'll get into it in a second, really trickles down into all of your targeting and your messaging, right? So in the second column here, where we talk about what they want, writers have a lot of writer's block and they have trouble brainstorming. And sometimes they need guidance and tips for frameworks on how to write, right? Like, how do I set up my characters? How do I build the plot? How do I set up my world and world builds? Like there's all these different considerations on how to layer texture and depth into the environment that the story is taking place in. I didn't know any of this stuff, but to be a good marketer for these people, I had to dive in and understand this stuff. Other examples here, I think another one that stuck out to me was they used to have, or they probably still have, anxiety around their words per day goal. So writers, one of the things that they struggle with is consistency. And one thing that kept on popping up in their research was, I got to hit my words per day goal. And so when we were writing copy and creative, we made sure to anchor in that phrase because it immediately resonates with people. It like viscerally connects to them. So yeah, that's the second column. Third column here is how they currently get what they want. And this is good for competitor research, knowing how our USPs stack up and juxtapose with other options in the marketplace. There was like Jasper at the time. Jasper was one of the first early movers. I think a lot of folks use that, but they had specific complaints about it. Like it didn't write in a way that was cohesive enough. Because Jasper, I think, primarily is like marketing copy, whereas pseudo write is more, full story writing. And so, yeah, their competitors there like Hyperwrite, ChatGPT, obviously a big one too. And that was actually one of our biggest 800-pound gorillas that we had to go up against. ChatGPT, everyone uses it, everyone knows about it, but context windows are short. All that stuff that loses cohesiveness and narrative consistency, pseudo-write build features for. And so moving to the last column here, the barriers are typically emotional things that people feel or get frustrated with when they're going about their day trying to do the thing that they are doing. And so writer's block was a big one, lack of inspiration, procrastination, time constraints, motivation. Those are the things that we keyed in on in our messaging and use them almost like as hooks, right? Like, hey, you have writer's block. Hey, you don't have enough time in the day to write. Hey, you feeling not motivated? Blah, blah, blah. We move into the features and benefits of pseudo write in the creative. And so, yeah, this is really the blueprint. And if you don't do this, you may have some theories in your head. It's best to get these theories on paper because this is a living document that will take updating as you go through user research, as you go through onboarding people, and as you get feedback. Things here will change, and it's good to get it on paper so that you can keep a living document of what the actual true representation of your ICP is. It's also good for sharing across with other stakeholders so that, for me, I can align on assumptions with my clients. I can share across to my team and my creative designers and strategists so that they can create creative based off of these assumptions. Without these things on paper, you basically don't have a good theory of how to acquire folks. With it, you have a much sharper roadmap.
Alvin, one of the things that you mentioned, I love this framework and I love the idea of using the last column as hooks for ad copy. One of the things that you mentioned is that you're not a writer. So what was your process for kind of learning these columns? Maybe talk about like 2 and 3. Were you going into Reddit? Were you using AI yourself? Like, how did you learn these things?
Exactly. Yeah, great question. So when I first started doing this 4 years ago, it was a painstaking process. I would go and browse specific subreddits because social media is a treasure trove of insights. People are commenting, posting. It's more or less anonymous on Reddit, so you get the unvarnished truth. But that takes a long time, and it's hard to find the right subreddits. There used to be a site called Subreddit Stats where you could like look at r/writer and then see what r/writers subscribers also subscribe to in other subreddits. You could like bounce between subreddits. sort by top posts of all time and just start like mining. Obviously, with AI and especially tools like Perplexity and Google's deep research from Gemini, all this stuff is like what used to take me 3 or 4 hours now takes just like 10 minutes, even if that. Of course, you need to like go in and like look at the source material to validate things, but today what we use is a lot of AI. There are some AI automation tools like Gumloop that I use to build a full automation that does this and more, like spitting out keywords, generating ad copy. Obviously, you have to make sure it's trained in a way where like the quality of the output is great, and Gumloop helps a lot with that. But yeah, used to be manual, now it's a lot of AI.
Amazing. Bob, anything that you would add? Do you do similar persona research before you go into an ad campaign, and does it look like this? Is it different? Do you have anything to add here?
Yeah, I mean, this is amazing, and like I've definitely borrowed a lot of the ideas that Alvin has shared here. I think sometimes like because now I'm consulting with different startups, there's I oftentimes like will ask if they have something like this, and I'm really surprised by what I find or the absence of what I find. And so sometimes if they have a product marketing function, there'll be there'll be some kind of framework, but it's incomplete. And so I use it as a starting point, but then kind of run it past this type of framework, and that helps me identify like what's missing, and try and poke around, see what I can find on my own, and also like validate it with the client. I'd say like maybe for B2B specifically, there are maybe some areas or some categories I like to dive deeper into. Things around like things around voice of customers, like you might find that on Reddit, but you might also find it on some like review sites or things like that. So there are like different sources that I tap into that are more like specific to B2B. And also like really dive into like the use cases, especially if the product is very horizontal. So an example like Notion for who I worked for a while, is a very horizontal product, and they have a lot of different target audiences, very different use cases. And so just trying to build a bit of a matrix of what these look like, and if there are like different audiences or if they are the same audience is really helpful. And so sometimes I have like just multiple versions of this for the different segments that they're focused on.
It's awesome. This question I'll start with Alvin, but I would love to hear if you have any thoughts here, Bob, on the B2B side. What, in your guys' opinion, is one underrated persona data point or persona kind of research category that you find most of your clients miss that's like a gold mine?
What do you mean in terms of like a source for insights or like one of the columns here?
Yeah, almost like a column. Like, maybe it's, this is a simple example, but maybe most people don't talk about like their alternatives, or maybe most people don't talk about like their education history, or like just like a hidden data point that you like to include in most of the personas that you build.
Yeah. For B2B specifically, I actually think it's not represented here. But what Fab was talking about related to use cases, B2B is harder to get specific with than something like B2C or D2C, because it's like you have a tangible product, you buy it, and this is what it does for your life. Whereas B2B, it's like more amorphous, it's more conceptual, right? It's like this software platform does this thing, or like we promise this benefit, and like the features are like these things, and like you kind of have to have more specific domain knowledge to like understand the value prop. I think it's harder for advertisers to do all of that storytelling in a static ad, or even like a 10-minute or 10-second animation or video. And I think the one of the clearest ways, and this is exact, I totally agree with Bob, to communicate that is to use a use case. And I think that's something that most B2B companies, well, some of them do, but not all of them do. And depending on how, to borrow a word from Bob, horizontal the product is, like you have to have a lot of that.
Awesome. Cool. So
Yeah.
yeah, Bob, what would you add?
Yeah, I was just gonna say like for B2B again specifically, like the really there's sometimes like gold mines in just talking to the sales team, right? Like I feel like sometimes the sales teams have their own sort of battle cards, or sometimes there's a sales enablement material that you can also ingest, and it's full of nuggets of like really good, interesting things around like what they've heard from customers, the objections, some of the objections that they have to competitors, the limitation of the competitor products, or the limitation of their own products, so that you know like where to put the emphasis on in the ad and where to kind of stay away from or kind of be more vague. And so yeah, I think mining the sales team and the sales conversations in the CRM for all that goodness is incredibly helpful. And I always try and get access to, Gong or whatever like sales recording tool that they have to try and like extract some of this as well for myself.
Yeah, 100%. Just to quickly add on to that, uh, totally. Like sales team, like battle, they have win-loss notes, they have objections, and like those things are absolute gold. Fab mentioned goodness. I thought of like a coconut, right? Like you crack it open, you get all that delicious juice on the inside, but you have to crack it open. But the sales team, that is chock full because it's on the front lines. They have firsthand experience and they see it over and over again, right? And so taking the win-loss notes, taking the objections, one of the things that I actually have started doing with some of my clients that are more in the premium price range. One example is a Heritage Flour Company. They're maybe 2 or 3 times more expensive than supermarket flour, but the product is 10 times better. But one of the common objections is that sticker shock of like, oh, it's expensive. So we've been working that into our process, our creative strategy to get ahead of objections before they even show up and use them actually as hooks in ads so that it's a little bit subversive and you can actually turn what is a con, the high price, into a pro because you're using it to like justify and storytell the reason why the flour is so much more expensive because of all these benefits, yada, yada, yada.
Love it. Cool. So we talked a little bit about the kind of first step in making more effective ads, which is getting really clear on your persona. We talked about some ways to get insights from Reddit, the sales team, how to use potential objections and lean into them as actually positives. But there may always be some kind of like qualitative or some more like kind of tangible firmographic quantitative data that research would miss. So next thing we want to talk about is how you layer in enrichment and scoring. And I'm going to briefly go through enrichment and scoring by like definition and some vendors out in the market, but then pass the mic over to Fab to kind of go into how he uses this for ad campaigns. So on the enrichment side, the enrichment tools that you use should sit at the top of your tool stack. They should integrate with your CRM and likely your CDP just to make sure that whichever data you're enriching these contacts with remains consistent across your different tools. And some of the vendors here you'll recognize right off the bat here: 6sense, ZoomInfo, Clearbit, Clay. All of these folks do some level of enrichment. They all position it slightly differently. It's all priced and packaged slightly differently. But if you're looking for a list of vendors to kind of just get started with as far as who offers these services, this is a pretty comprehensive list. So as you go into lead scoring, again, it's sort of like the same message. There's plenty of tools to use for this, but you just have to make sure of 2 things. The first is that it integrates at some level with your CRM so that you can qualify and pass these scored leads to your sales team, and also integrates with your marketing platform so you can use this data in ad targeting, which we'll talk about momentarily. This list looks slightly different than perhaps the last one, but all of these tools do some level of lead scoring. Some offer it as like their sole service. Others it offers it as part of their service. Like HubSpot is a lot of other things and just has lead scoring as a small part of it. But like Lead Scoring AI is a fully AI-driven lead scoring platform that integrates with your CRM. So that you don't have to do a lot of the manual work that you'd have to do in HubSpot to set up that scoring. So that's just a basic overview of both of these things and some vendors that you can look to do it. Fab, I'd love to hand it to you to just for you to just kind of educate us on how you use both of these tactics in ad campaigns that you set up for your clients.
Yeah, I mean, especially in B2B, like data enrichment is really the name of the game. There's so much difficulty in like getting getting the right data, or at least in the time that I spent in working in B2B organization or helping B2B organization grow, it's usually a major pain point. And so making if there's a RevOps function, making them your friend. If there's a MarTech function, also like kind of working hand in hand with them is really, really helpful. It's funny, I was actually listening to, so I work with Clearbit, Clay, ZoomInfo, just to call out, ZoomInfo like being kind of the incumbent in B2B, Clearbit sort of somewhere in the middle, and Clay being the sort of more recent, more modern version of all of these tools, at least in my perspective. Clay has been actually really, really fun to work with. And I was listening to a podcast with the founder just this morning on my walk with the dog, and I realized that I actually experienced like their go-to-market motion myself, because they went. So I started working with them when I was at Hex, and they targeted me as the growth marketer to then like have that conversation with RevOps, and it's actually their go-to-market strategy right now. It's really going to the growth marketer and then RevOps as a secondary audience, which I thought was like pretty interesting. Listening to it this morning, but in terms of the use case, like for Hex specifically, when we started talking to Clay, so we had ZoomInfo. ZoomInfo does like kind of the cookie cutter enrichment based on like mostly work emails. So anyone who has like a work domain when they sign up, great. You can kind of categorize them, have a bunch of like industry of company level data, like company size, industry job titles, whatever you can have. But it's very limited because a lot of people sign with their personal email, and that's the main kind of pain point in B2B for ad targeting, is that people browse and are logged in on Google with their personal email. They do things with their personal email. They sign up to product to have a sneak peek with their personal email because don't want to be bombarded on their work email with a bunch of spam, right? And so that's usually like a big bottleneck. A lot of companies will just discard all these personal email and think, oh, they're not a fit, or like people don't have the right intent, or they're just not qualified. It's like that is just lazy, in my opinion. And I think that's when like you really need to like use these data enrichment providers to try and see like who's behind that personal email. The fact that they're not ready to give you the work email, they're not ready to book a demo, doesn't mean that they're not in market for that product. Clearly, they're on your site. They want to peek in your tool, and especially for developer tools like Hex, like it's very technical audience. They gotta like the cliche is like they definitely don't want to talk to sales. Like it's the last thing they'll want to do, right? And so like having that product-led growth motion and having being able to like sign with any type of email to take a peek and get a feel for the UI and explore it on your own time, like equip yourself with all the information that you need to have a sales conversation is invaluable. And so the cool thing about tools like these is that they kind of like they can become sort of a one-stop shop for data enrichment. So I think the way they describe Play is kind of almost like a spreadsheet. And so it's like you have a spreadsheet, a bunch of columns, and so you can kind of shop around and create a column for different data providers that might be really relevant to your business. And so for Hex, for example, one thing that was really important for the ICP was not just the firmographics, so the company size are more like enterprise levels, worth more than SMB or startups, okay? But then also like the tech stack, right? So Hex only works with cloud data warehouses, so like a Snowflake or a Redshift, and so like identifying like which companies have these data warehouses, like you might in the startup world, I think like everybody has those, but there's a lot of other companies out there on LinkedIn that are built on like more legacy kind of tech stack, and so being able to, instead of having to do contracts like one by one with every single provider, like having this sort of unified workflow, if you like, where you can kind of shop around, and some providers are very good at identifying tech stack. So you can identify those, you can work with the team to kind of figure out how to build that, and it's kind of like a waterfall chart. So you'll start with the whatever. If you have a contract with ZoomInfo, you can also have that webhook connected to ZoomInfo, get what you want with ZoomInfo. then if it doesn't, Zoomflow doesn't find it because it's a personal email, you can do a reverse lookup with another provider and do another reverse lookup with another provider if he doesn't find it. And then finally, you find the LinkedIn profile. And on LinkedIn profile, you can infer like all these other information about who they are, what company they work for, and attributes about that company. And so then that builds a much better picture from that personal email to, hey, actually, this is a data scientist at a Fortune 500 company in the kind of team that has the best use case for Hex. It's like, we should absolutely like identify that person and like nurture them along their journey, right?
I think that's
So
such
I'm
a
gonna pause there.
Yeah, no, because it's like I was actually going to say, like, I think that's such a powerful point, because even to clarify, on our request access form, we block personal email addresses. We only let you sign up via your work email. And that's something we've wondered internally, which is like, as a buyer myself, if I'm going to trial a product or if I'm going to request a demo, 9 times out of 10, I'm going to use my personal email, just
Yep.
so that, my work email doesn't get crowded. And so, I think that's just a really powerful takeaway in terms of, maybe accepting personal emails for your product-led growth motion or your demo requests, but using that kind of enrichment to kind of, identify who they are at the business level.
Yeah.
My follow-up question for you, Fab, is once you have this enriched data, what is the next step that you take to kind of like translate this into an ad campaign?
Yeah, so this is when like working hand in hand with RevOps, if you have a team that does RevOps, or MarTech, or getting your hands dirty and learning about MarTech and RevOps yourself is really helpful. Because obviously like the data enrichment is one piece of the puzzle. But there's a lot of different tools in go-to-market and in growth teams, right? So you have your CRM, you have your ad platform, you have your maybe a different lead scoring tool. Maybe you have a tool that the SDR use to do outreach. Maybe you have another email tool that you use to do lifecycle emails, right? And so all of these tools need to kind of like to orchestrate campaigns and to make sense of them. You need to have a way to like do the enrichment like pretty upfront, so really early on, like right after the sign up, so that you can kind of if you have those systems mapped out, you really have to think of it as a system, right? That's why like kind of working with our ops team who are very used to building systems and like making the systems connect and maintain them and maintain those connections is really helpful. Um, and so that was my strategy anyways, like to try and like not have to build this all by myself. It's like, hey, like make friends with RevOps, like loop them in, like get them also like to experience the fact that it solves a lot of the problems, a lot of the gaps in coverage, a lot of the gaps in and just make the engine work smoother and better. And so but practically speaking, like I mean, for ad platforms, you really need like that API integration, right? That's like how you can kind of also like pass back that information. So you working with like the conversions API on Google, the conversions API on Facebook, pass back some of the attributes and some of these things that you've enriched, and selectively pass it back, right? So when you enrich all of these, and if you open so at Hex, when we opened to personal email, it was we described it as like open the gates because it was like we knew there's going to be this huge influx of signups. A lot of them you'd have to discard, a lot of them would be disqualified, but that was okay, right? Because out of all of these flood of new signups, there's still a handful of very, very valuable leads. And so the exercise is like enrich early on before they get to your CRM. In the CRM, then you have all the attributes. You can kind of the one that are discarded kind of get parked into some placeholder catch-all sort of non-qualified, non-commercial sort of segmentation, and then everything else is what you want to focus on and activate in the ad platforms. And so, for example, if you're passing if you're building like customer lists or customer match lists in Google Ads, you'll only send the one that are qualified with the conversions API. And the beauty of like also using this data enrichment provider is that you can kind of again, if they sign up with their work email, you can reverse look up into their personal email that they use on Google to increase that match rate. And so it works both ways, right? like that reverse lookup, how it works both ways. You can just identify that person and just find people who are like them. You can also like build like larger lists, right? Once you identify like a company is interested, you can use the data enrichment providers to find like other people who work at that company with the same job titles, and pass essentially build a larger list to target off of.
Love it.
Again, I'm gonna pause that because I bombarded a lot of things.
No, it's incredibly valuable. I'm learning a lot just hosting this. In the interest of time, I do want to move into kind of the platform specific targeting strategies. But before I do, Alvin, do you have anything to add on the enrichment or scoring side?
No, I mean, Fab covered all of it. So yeah, happy to move on.
Cool. All right. So now we have the persona built. We've learned about kind of like layering some additional information on with lead scoring or lead enrichment. And so now we're kind of like moving into the platform itself. So the first question that I want to kick off for both of you here, one or the other, feel free to start, is just basically, what is the difference in approaching these platforms if you have first party data, like we've talked about, or if you do not have first party data? We'll start there and then branch out.
Sure. Yeah. In the scenario where you don't have first party data, going back to that blueprint of that persona table, I think you have a slide here, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So if we're going after, there are a couple channels. The ones that do most of the heavy lifting, LinkedIn, Google, Meta, what they want, those are like your keywords on Google. These are things that people in these positions, in this example here, marketing decision makers, CMOs, marketing directors, email marketing managers, they'll be typing things into Google search related to what's in column 2. So they're looking for what they want, right? And that's going to get you, I think, majority of the performance in Google. And without getting too technical, there are ways you can set this up where you're using a standard search campaign to show up on Google search. You can use something like Performance Max to create search themes, which are basically just lists of keywords that will allow you to target people who have searched those things, but not on Google, because Google is actually one of the more, Google search is one of the more expensive placements. So like you can hit them on YouTube or the Google app on their phone or even in Gmail. But when you go to something like LinkedIn or Meta, obviously keywords, they're not really a thing, right? So like you can, well, it's kind of a thing in a way where maybe there's an interest target on LinkedIn. Meta used to have more interest targets, but as privacy has increased, they've stripped back a lot of that granularity. But on LinkedIn, at least, I think it can still target a lot of interests. But on those more demographic targeting channels, column 1 is going to be, I think, most of the levers you can pull. So targeting on LinkedIn, very robust, especially for B2B, right? You can get into the company size, the industry, the title. It's probably the best channel for getting high quality leads for B2B. On Meta, you have some of these levers, but obviously they don't have job title and stuff like that. Well, they do, but it's not nearly as robust and comprehensive as it is on LinkedIn. So wouldn't necessarily recommend putting too much budget if you're doing B2B lead gen on Meta, unless you have some sort of first party data. In which case, you can, whether it's like a cold lead list that you've exported out of one of those platforms like Apollo or something like that, you can upload those for direct prospecting on any of these platforms, or you can use that as like a seed audience to create a lookalike to go after people who look like that seed audience. But yeah, Fab, any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, lookalikes is kind of like the most obvious use case for like first party data. At least like that's where the most of the energy went into, at least until all of these app platforms, due to privacy reasons, starting to retire lookalike targeting functionality. I think Google has one campaign type that is left, demand gen, where you can use lookalike targeting, and so definitely want to explore if you have that first party data to activate, being able to find people with similar attributes. But yeah, I think agree with what you said, Alvin. LinkedIn's kind of sort of gold standard in terms of like firmographic targeting and natively on the platform. You can even upload like companies lists. So if your sales team has a target list of companies, you can upload that into LinkedIn and only show ads to people who work at these companies. That's really powerful. That helps like kind of have a really good starting point for your targeting, and then using that first party data to kind of like feedback like the quality signal, right? So like, oh yeah, maybe they work for this company, but they are not signing up, or they work for this company, but they're not really interested or not in market. And so you can kind of like start like refining that sort of initial targeting with the first party data that you're passing back. And you're collecting also more signals. So one thing that I've kind of always pushed for in companies that have a product-led motion is that onboarding survey. So when you sign up for a product and they ask you a bunch of questions, right? Like it's very controversial in companies because like oftentimes especially as a growth marketer, I want to remove friction, right? I want to make it easy to sign up. But I've learned that this is the one time that people like gonna get access to something for free. This is the one time they're ready to answer like maybe 4 or 5 questions. And that is so valuable in just building that profile, right? This is like, I guess sometimes I've heard of it referred to as zero party data, or essentially it's like self-declared information. And so you can ask about that use case. You can ask about who they are, like beyond like their job title, right? What they care about or what the problem is, or maybe what other competitor product they're currently using, right? So collecting a lot of information that might be useful in segmenting better. And so like activating that kind of first party data can be super, super powerful in just better segmentation. Like for Hex, for example, like asking like what data warehouse do you use, right? And so in the nurture flow, we're not going to send you a bunch of Redshift use case if you're using Snowflake, right? And so like just it then helps you activate and orchestrate campaigns that are like very relevant and very personalized to the user that just signed up. And that's like where like people get a little bit more interested, and you cut through the noise in the inbox.
Yeah, 100%. Just want to add on to that. That was something that I learned a couple of years ago too, that the most motivated a prospect will ever be to deal with any of your nonsense in terms of like gathering data is when they haven't gotten to play with the tool yet. And it's kind of like dating, right? And I'll speak to this from a guy's perspective, but when you're chasing someone you like, you're like, really courting hard, but 3 years into marriage, maybe it's not not as passionate. The same thing here, right? Like before you've gotten to play with the tool, you really want to play with it. You're willing to deal with all the nonsense. And the reason why, in addition to what Fab said, this is so important is because if you're gonna do any sort of retargeting or any work in the ad platforms, you want to know exactly who you're talking to. And if you have that zero party data, you can segment your lists that you upload back into the platforms accordingly, and have one that's for like maybe someone who's like at a small startup with 10 people, another different list for someone who's at like a 500 plus enterprise or medium business or something like that. And the messaging and the CPAs will be different for those people, right? Because for the lower, smaller company, maybe the LTV and wallet size isn't as big. Whereas for the larger one, the ROAS is going to have a stronger start because their LTV might be a little higher. And so you want to be able to dial up and down your investment in the platforms based off of those kinds of signals and dimensions. And you'll never be able to get it without either the enrichment that we're talking about or the onboarding survey and questionnaire, which is obviously more accurate and more free.
Absolutely. So when you guys are onboarding a new client, or if maybe this is a situation that you've worked at in-house, What is your general like mental framework for picking which ad channels to invest in? Like, are you guys going through like a checklist in your head of like where to invest? Is it typically like asked for by the client or the CMO? Like, what's your guys' mental framework for choosing channel investments for ads?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think it's a bit of a slalom for me. Like at least like it's kind of like a dance. It's like you kind of figure out, especially when you're in startup world. It's like a lot of people are wearing many hats, just trying to get a lay of the land, getting the right answers. So it's like, okay, like who are you targeting? Sometimes they don't have a good answer for that, right? It's like or the answer is like so broad. It's like, oh, I'm targeting every company on earth. It's like great. Um, yeah, you're a B2B business, but like what else? Like what do they use it for? And so like you get into the use case, you get into the a little bit more into like, okay, what's also like what assets are available? So like that's often a bottleneck in like earlier stage company is like, do you have any form of gated content? Do you have a designer that you work with? Do you have like some image assets? Do you have video assets? Right? Like what do I have to work with in terms of creatives, or what can we build? Right? What are that some and then what are your goals, right? Do you want to get leads right away? Are you not yet like launched to GA, and then you're looking more to kind of like warm up an audience and have some sort of like thought leadership awareness in market and sort of like starting warming up warming up like companies that are in your prospect lists, or are you as fully fledged like kind of like growth mode, want to pour a lot of money into like driving a lot of lead, like a lot of like signups, and then like building a huge list to remarket off of, right? Like a huge list in your CRM that you can segment and your sales team can like pick and choose and fish from, right? So like there's different goals and sort of different sort of, I don't know if it's a go market motion, but um it might be very different from company to company. And then what I also think about is after collecting all that information is what is the size of your target audience, right? If you're an enterprise B2B business, like you're going to target the same like few thousands of buyers for that tool that you can find and really cherry pick with a very expensive channel like LinkedIn that's like really like can help you narrow in on those audiences. Um, and you're probably going to have to do a lot of the events. You're probably going to have to have like gated content and that more like traditional lead gen motion. If you're targeting startup, there's many more startups, right? Then you have a lot of different options, right? Because you can reach these individual users and these end users like everywhere they are, like on whether they're consuming on Google content on Google, searching for stuff on Google, consuming content on Meta or on TikTok, right? And so it's like kind of size of the audience, and then also like kind of the assets that you have to work with or you have like appetite to work with, and a little bit like that GTM motion if it's defined.
Love it. That's a like I already can see the content piece of distilling that down into a flow chart. Alvin, do you have a similar mental model when you're kind of choosing initial channel investments for your customers?
For me, I think there are kind of historical data points that skew my gut towards one channel or the other. For instance, most of the time when we run LinkedIn without any sort of pre-existing lead list, the quality is low. Sorry, did I say LinkedIn? I meant Meta. On LinkedIn, quality is high, but much more expensive. And so it's kind of a conversation with the client too, like based on your budget, can you afford to go on LinkedIn? Um, but usually I like to take an approach where we're not being prescriptive and we test a little bit on all channels. And then based on the ROI and the return and the performance, we just like an investment, right? Like you scale up what works well and you keep building that position. So yeah, it's less we try to keep our options open from the get-go in the beginning.
Awesome.
I
Cool.
just want to add something real quick, Chris, because it's a misconception that really sort of gets to me at this point, and so I'm just gonna throw it out here for posterity. Um, a lot of B2B companies, especially the ones who target enterprise customers, the same one who discard all their personal emails saying they're junk, are oftentimes like we'll say like have this knee-jerk reaction that's like Meta is not for me. It's like Meta is not for me. It's like, okay, well, if you're a B2B company targeting startup, Meta is definitely for you. Like at least it should be part of your testing roadmap, right? Because a lot of your customers are going to be spending a shit ton of time consuming content there. And so if you're not in front of them there, and this is a much cheaper way to be in front of them than to pay like $20 a click on LinkedIn, right? And so I think again, like that size of the audience, like how many impressions you need to put out there to get and it's not about spray and pray, right? It's just about like the fact that there are like just so many startups and so many people working at these startups. And so like that the audience pool, that total addressable market is much bigger. You just can't afford to deploy like a giant budget that you would need to do that on an expensive platform like LinkedIn. If you have enterprise customers and your average contract value is super high, and then you can afford to hit that same audience, that same very small audience with a much higher frequency, then do it. But it's this what I think this is where like kind of the cost also like gets into the equation. Yeah, I've had a lot of success like driving event registrations for B2B webinars and using Meta, for example. And a lot of people will just think like, oh no, Meta is not for B2B. It's like, no, it can be.
Yeah, 100%. It's all about like, where is your audience, right? Like, and I'd actually be curious what the daily active users are for LinkedIn versus Meta, but like Meta has just got everyone on the planet basically on those platforms, right? And so by that nature, they've got your targets there too. It's just about, and this is largely what we're talking about here today, right? With the first party data, it's like, how do you target and get to those eyeballs? Because, you know, on LinkedIn, there's probably less young people, right? Like students, they're not on there because they're studying. They're not quite working yet. Maybe that's just an assumption. Whereas on Meta, it's them plus the business decision makers. It's just about how you find them on platforms that have a lower, like, I guess, percentage composition of them. But yeah, at the end of the day, like if you want scale and especially cheap, Meta is a great tool because the CPMs are obviously much lower there than LinkedIn, and everyone's on there. You just got to figure out how to get to them.
I think it's a really powerful thought in terms of, you know, not making an assumption that the only place that you can target business decision makers is a business social networking platform like LinkedIn. My question coming out of that is, have you guys seen like vice versa happen where you're selling a B2C product, say you're selling like an Ember mug or, you know, like a Yeti mug. Have you guys seen any of your B2C clients actually choose LinkedIn as a place to advertise?
That's actually an interesting, hilarious question. You know what? Why would you? That's my gut reaction. And maybe I'm the flip side now of what Fab was saying earlier, but why would you? Because you can reach that same person for much cheaper on Meta. In fact, the fact that I think I saw like a B2C product on LinkedIn one time being advertised, and I was like, why are they doing this? Because it's cost prohibitive because of the CPMs and CPCs. But you know, I take the fact that there are basically none of those on the platform as a sign that it doesn't work. And my core assumption is that like the cost of the media is just like the people are there. It's just that your CPAs are going to be so much higher because your input media costs are so much higher.
Mm.
Yeah, I don't know. I can't think of an example of either an ad that I've seen that's for consumer product or a consumer product that I think would be worth distributing heavily through LinkedIn. But they could be an edge case. Like again, it's about that sort of niche audience. So if you're making a product that only a very small subset of a very small subset of users are going to get value from, like, I don't know, we were talking about watches earlier. Like maybe it's this like super fancy watch that only like the highest paid person on earth, this only the CEOs of like the types of companies like would ever want to buy it. Like maybe that's a way to reach them. Like I don't know, but that's a pretty an edge case.
Yeah. Actually, I can think of a good one. It's Jet Suite X. And I think the reason why they might find success there is because the type of person is an executive or someone who can kind of afford to splurge a little bit on like private plane travel.
Mm.
So the persona matches. Also, the LTV is high, right? Because like flight costs X amount of dollars. You assume that it's a sticky habit and like you can get like 10 flights out of a person every year. So like the LTV and like what you can generate that attention into in terms of revenue and margin on your back end as the business. I think those two things have to be there, right? Like you can't be selling a
Right.
10% margin product on LinkedIn. You're not going to make
Exactly.
yeah. And it kind of goes to what Fab was saying too, like watch is probably higher margin. So yeah, I think those are key inputs.
Love it. Cool. Okay, so we've talked about the full formula here. So much interesting value from Fab and Alvin. And so the last thing that we just wanted to talk about briefly, and I'll pass the mic to Fab here for maybe his opinion on what his favorite visualization tool is. But of course, to know if your ads are working, you have to be able to visualize you have to have a reporting tool, whether it's the native ad platform's reporting tool. But the problem with that is it doesn't see all of your other data sources, like whether those leads have closed or anything like that. So yeah, Fab, what are your favorite kind of tools to report on ad performance? And then Alvin would love your thoughts too.
Yeah. I mean, let me just start with saying what my least favorite reporting tools are, and it's usually CRM, so incumbent CRM. So the HubSpot and the Salesforce of this world are the pain of my existence. I've worked with a lot of reporting tools, but I find it so difficult to pull any kind of like useful information out of these tools, and it just drives me crazy that I have to work with them, and that most companies have this kind of like experience. And so I'm very excited with the work that you guys are doing at Clarify. I think making this an experience that doesn't suck is going to be a game changer. And so with that said, there's a bunch of tools that I've worked with. So Luca, who was acquired by Google, is kind of like pretty ubiquitous in terms of even like the Google team uses it to pull reports and build. They have a lot of templates and things for Google Ads account, for Google Analytics account, for Search Console, things like that. So very kind of easy to use, easy to like drag and drop things. It's not very customizable unless you know like Looker ML and all of these things. If you connect it to your own data, and so I think that's like a little bit of a blocker for some people. Obviously, Hex, I worked there for a while. A little bit biased, but I think it's a very powerful tool, very flexible. And I've been able to use it with my sort of like pretty rusty SQL skills, helping and working together. It was a really good way for me to like work together with the data team. So they had some they built some components and some queries that are really more complicated, and I could kind of like drag and drop and pick and choose like what I wanted to build a dashboard that was useful for me. And so that helped like kind of facilitate that development of the reporting side, where it was already they've done all the heavy lifting to connect it to the right data sources and to build the underlying tables, and I could just build the visualization of this thing that were helpful for me to optimize like operationally. And Optmyzr, this is a tool that I used back in the Airbnb days. It's a fun tool. It's like it's not just a reporting tool. It's also like you can automate things in Google Ads, etc. And they have I think a new paid social component. The UI is not the most like modern looking, I would say, but it's pretty powerful, and I've used it a lot recently as I started advising companies to build like audits for their accounts. So they have a lot of like also components that you can kind of drag and drop and pivot things with different dimensions. So looking at like audiences and device and geos, and without like having to do a lot of like pivot tables and building slides, which is like my pet peeve. And so yeah, I've used it a lot recently to like build that. They have a really nice thing to like visualize like quality score at the account level and like the top movers for like campaigns and ad groups, which Google for some reason doesn't aggregate in their reporting. They just like they and so yeah, it's just a really nice way to see like when you're starting in an account, like what's the lay of the land, and where you can kind of start making optimizations.
Awesome. Guys, this has been great. I have one final question for you guys that I saw in the chat that I just want to end with. If you had to start from scratch, a client comes to you and they're a fairly new startup, not a ton of audience, maybe little to no first party data, pretty limited budget, but they're like, hey, for this engagement with you to be successful, I need to see some pipeline in the next 30 days. Do you guys have like a go-to play that you tend to turn to? I'm sure it's dependent on a lot of things, but just curious your guys' answer if someone comes to you with a request like that.
I think before we even start spending money in the channel, you can afford to be a little bit inefficient in the beginning if you have a lot of runway because you can test and learn. But if you don't, then you got to nail that ICP stuff and really make sure that the creative team on their end, or in my case, like whatever ads we're churning out, really nail those wants, desires, pain points very, very well, and also have a diversified set of bets in that creative set. So you're testing like use case 1, use case 2, use case 3. Because you just can't afford to have low conversion rates if you have a short runway. You should be doing that anyways, but even more so. And then in terms of channel, I'd probably pick LinkedIn just because it's less technical setup to get that really great targeting data. Just plug and play. And it'll probably have the highest propensity to drive the right whale type client that you want, and not so much like a smaller person on Meta without first party data.
Love it. Bob?
If they're targeting enterprise and they want pipeline in a month, I'd be like asking if this is the right goal, or if it's like how long are the sales cycles typically, and I think I'd be kind of using my French questionable investigation head and be like, is this real? Like, yeah, I mean, in my experience, like sales cycles in enterprise are so long. Like even just the security review, especially if it's a developer tool or things like that, can take a lot longer. I understand it's like maybe not close one by 1 month, but even like just getting that demo booked in the schedule and things like takes a lot of time. And so I think I'd be kind of questioning like what they're trying to, if they have like a very specific playbook already, like, and it's like go, like, and we can execute, sure. But if we're trying to figure out a playbook and we're trying to figure out like what works and do some experimentation, it's going to take more than 1 month. And so I think that would be like my very imperfect answer is like, let's kind of go back to the question point, like figure out the assumptions that you have and why that timeline is so aggressive.
Cool. Okay, this has been great, guys. We're right up at time here, so I'm going to close it out. Thanks everyone for coming today. Thank you so much, Fab and Alvin, for just giving an absolute masterclass here. We'll get the recording out in the next couple of days, and we'll be writing a follow-up piece about this. So yeah, before we close out, any last words of wisdom, ad related or life related, Fab or Alvin?
Yeah. If anyone likes anything that we talked about here and want more of it, I write a Substack, and you can find that on my website. If you just go to adsbyalvin.com, you can subscribe, read the articles, or not subscribe, whatever. You can also find a lot of the playbooks and templates and frameworks that I've built for all this stuff, including the 1 hour persona on that site as well. There's a little playbook section up top. Click on that, brings you to a Gumroad place where you can download all those ad sets. So yeah, feel free to go there and check it out.
Yeah, Alvin got some great content, so you should definitely check it out. I've been very lazy and like not written a lot of stuff publicly, but I love to talk to founders or growth people. So yeah, like reach out, hit me up if you have any questions or follow-ups, or if I can be helpful to you.
Awesome. Have a great day, everybody.
Thanks, you too. See ya.